I think a lot of artists are learning too much. That sounds completely wrong. Because obvious, if you want to become a better artist, you have to learn. You have to learn anatomy, perspective, composition, color, light, design, storytelling. There's an almost endless amount of information you can study. But after teaching artists for over a decade, I started noticing something very strange. A lot of artists already know much more than they actually use. And the strange thing is, whenever somebody asks what should they do different, I realize they know they should use reference. They know they should think about composition to simplify shapes, or to should practice perspective. And whenever I see this, I kind of see a bit of myself in there. They know all these things. And yet, when they sit down to draw, they often do exactly the same thing they did yesterday. Maybe the problem isn't that you don't know enough. Maybe the problem is that you haven't learned how to use what you already know. And more importantly, how to turn that knowledge into something creative. We live in probably the best time in history to learn art. Or aren't we? I mean, let's ignore AI for a second. But if you want to learn art, you can open YouTube right now and you find thousands of hours of tutorials. I think back when I was learning art, there were only these online forums. And everything was kind of cryptical. And everybody said, just study, bro. Just do a study. Copy this, copy that, and you will be a concept artist, a master painter. And every time if I go back into my old forum entries, I have to laugh about how naive I was. I ignored everything around me and I just focused on producing. Because these days, whenever you need a tutorial, you have anatomy courses, perspective, painting, books, Patreon pages, online schools, artist breakdowns, brush packs, reference libraries. I mean, you can even get a mentor. Right? I mean, I'm a mentor. I'm teaching people from all over the world, which is a big privilege in my opinion. So you can basically have a personal trainer for your own art. There's information everywhere, and that's amazing. But there's also a strange side effect. Learning feels like progress. Watching a 3-hour anatomy video feels productive, right? Buying another art book feels productive. Saving 50,000 reference feels productive. Every reorganizing of your reference folders can feel productive. And technically, you are doing something related to art. But there is one uncomfortable difference between studying and creating. When you study something, you don't have to prove that you can actually do it. You can watch somebody explain perspective and completely understand what they're saying. You can look at a diagram and think, yeah, makes sense. And then you close the video, open your sketchbook, try to draw the same thing, and suddenly everything falls apart. Because understanding something, being able to use it are two completely different skills. And I think this is where a lot of artists get stuck. They keep adding knowledge on top of another, but they never give the knowledge enough opportunities to become actual experiences. One of the biggest traps in art, or also in life, I would say, is this idea that you need to prepare before you're allowed to make the thing you actually want to make. You want to make comics? First, you need to get better at anatomy. You want to design characters? First, you need to learn clothing. You want to draw environments? You need to have perfect perspective. Before, you are not allowed to do that. You want to make big illustrations? Maybe after another 6 months of practice, then I could start with little illustrations, yeah. And this can continue forever, because there will always be something you don't know. I've been drawing professionally for years, and there are still countless things I don't know. And that's absolutely normal. And interestingly, artists have struggled with this feeling for a very long time. Hokusai is a beautiful example. He had already spent decades making art. When late in his life he wrote about how he felt that only around the age of 70 he had to begin to understand the true forms of things. And he believed that if he could continue into his 80s or 90s or even hundreds, his work would continue become more alive. Think about that for a moment. This guy, the artist behind some of the most recognizable images in art history. And even he didn't seem to think like, okay, I arrived. Now I finally know how to draw. There was always another level. And I think that's important. Because if you're waiting for a moment where you finally feel completely ready, that moment might never come. You have to understand that you make the work while you become the artist. The problem starts when preparation becomes a replacement for creating. Because eventually you have to make a bad version. You have to make a bad comic. You have to make the awkward character design, the environment with broken perspective, the illustration where composition doesn't work. Because the bad version gives you something that another tutorial can't give you. It gives you information about yourself. It tells you what you actually struggle with. Your drawings should tell you what to learn. Imagine you decide to draw a busy street scene. You start drawing and halfway through you realize, I have absolutely no freaking idea how to organize all these people. Great. Now you have a real problem. Maybe you need to learn composition, or you need to study grouping. Maybe you need to look at a crowd scene from movies or another reference. Maybe you need to simplify your values. But now you're learning for a reason. You're not studying composition because somebody told you. You're studying composition because your drawing just showed you exactly why it's important. That difference is huge. The same things happen with anatomy. Don't spend 6 months on learning every muscle before you're drawing characters. Draw freaking characters. And when you constantly struggle with shoulders, study shoulders. If every hand looks terrible, study hands. Oh my god. Watch my 40-minute videos on how to draw better hands. If your characters always feel stiff, study gesture. If your drawings feel flat, study form from perspective. Your work should create questions. And your learning should help you answer those questions. When you go back into the work, and this relationship between making and learning isn't something new. If you look through Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks, and there is a book, I have it myself, you can see this constant relationship between observation, questions, investigation, and drawing. Drawing in itself wasn't only a way of presenting what he already understood. He didn't want it to show people how good he can draw. He didn't want it to be acknowledged and people come by and say, oh, you draw so well. It was also a way of understanding. He studied anatomy. He studied movement, light, machines, water, nature, butterflies. And drawing became a part of investigation. He observed something, he drew it, and then created new questions. He investigated those questions, and then he drew it again. Actually, I want that you ask yourself right now. Pause the video and ask yourself, the last drawing that you made, what question did it create? Your studying helps you to answer it. And then your next drawing creates another question. What I can see in people asking me stuff on live stream or people who come in portfolio reviews, I think a lot of artists imagine improvement. They think it is like learn, 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 practice, learn, learn, and then eventually making something good. I think a much better loop is this. Create, fail, notice, learn, and try again. And then create, fail, notice, learn, and try again. And every time you repeat that loop, the next problem becomes more specific. At first you might say, my drawing just looks bad. That's not very useful if you ask me. But after enough experience, you start becoming more precise. The silhouette isn't readable. The perspective is flat in the scene. You know, sometimes I tell new students, hey, you have to push the values more. In 2 out of 4 cases, they ask, what do you mean with pushing values? Of course, they are not there yet because they haven't tried it. They haven't had the question in their head. Do I need to push the values? Now you have something that you can actually work on. And that's when learning becomes incredibly powerful. Because now you're not collecting random information. You're solving problems. There's another problem with constantly learning. And this is a little strange. Sometimes the more rules you learn, the more afraid you become to break them. You start drawing a figure and immediately think, is the anatomy correct? Is the perspective correct? Composition, shape design, am I using the right values? Is the lighting of the physique accurate? And suddenly you aren't really drawing anymore. You're kind of like running a checklist. I've seen this happen with a lot of different students. They become technically smarter, but creatively more careful. And creativity needs a certain amount of stupidity. And not actual stupidity, more like willingness to do something before you know whatever works. So basically just jumping right into it. To maybe try a strange camera angle, to distort a character, or to combine something that should not belong together. When I teach people design basics, in most cases, they don't know how to design because they try to make things to look real. And that's maybe sounds counterintuitive. Right? If I ask you to design a hammer, the hammer should make sense. But if I ask them to design and every drawing looks the same, they're not designing anymore. You get what I'm saying? They have to open their mind for possibilities. To make something exaggerated, to make something ugly, to follow an idea simply because it makes you curious. Because if every decision has to be correct, you eventually stop making interesting stuff. or interesting decisions. And I think filmmaking gives us really interesting examples for this. Hayao Miyazaki is famous for developing parts in his films through the process of creating the storyboard themselves. He doesn't necessarily need every single part of the movie completely solved before the visual process begins. The story can continue developing while the film is being visually explored. I personally love that idea because it suggests that creating isn't simply the execution of an idea you've already finished inside of your head. Creating can be the process through which you discover the idea. You draw something, that drawing gives you another idea. You follow it, and that creates another problem, and then you solve that problem. And slowly the work starts telling you where you want to go. Sometimes you don't think first and create second. Sometimes creating is thinking. Okay, so let's be real. The point of learning anatomy isn't to make every human body anatomically perfect. The point is to understand the body well enough so you can manipulate it, right? So you can draw your own cool characters. The point of learning perspective isn't to spend the rest of your life drawing perspective grids. It's to understand the space well enough that you can play with the space, that you can conquer the place, that you can put everything in that place. Picasso's ball lithographs are a great example for this. He started with a relatively naturalistic ball. You can clearly see the anatomy, the volume, the weight of the animal. And then across the series, he starts removing information. The anatomy becomes simpler, the shape becomes more graphic, details disappear, and eventually almost nothing is left. A few shapes, a few lines, but somehow it's still a ball. And the interesting part is that the final image doesn't feel like it was made by somebody who couldn't draw a ball. It feels like it was made by somebody who understood the subject well enough to decide what wasn't necessary and then to reduce it. And this is a very important distinction, especially in art, especially in this DNA where everybody's posting their 9-to-5 video on TikTok and saying, here's my canvas reveal until I don't have to go back into my 9-to-5. Simplification isn't necessarily absence of knowledge. Sometimes it's knowledge being used intentionally. And whereas knowledge becomes creativity. You learn something, you understand it, you use it, and then you start messing with it. Maybe the head becomes too big. Maybe the perspective becomes extreme. Maybe you remove information. Maybe you exaggerate the gesture. But none of those things are completely new. But the combination is yours. And that's something I think artists sometimes misunderstand about creativity. Creativity doesn't mean inventing something from absolutely nothing. It often means taking things you already know and using them in a way you haven't used them before. Okay, so this was a lot of talk by me. But here's actually something that I want you to try. Before you watch another art tutorial, make something. Not a study, something you actually want to make. A character, a comic book page, an environment, a creature, finished illustration, whatever it is. And while you're making it, don't stop every 5 minutes to search for another tutorial. Don't ask yourself if it's good. Don't rate it. Don't label it. Don't ask yourself if you can post it on Instagram. It is not time for it. This voice has to be shut. In that moment, the artist voice is the only voice that's necessary. And then use what you already know. Make a decision, guess, experiment, use a reference, make a mistake, and finish it. And only when it's finished, look at it and ask yourself, what actually went wrong? Not what art skill should I learn now, but what problem did this drawing reveal? And then pick one. Then study that problem and create again. Because I don't think most artists need another 100 hours of information. They need more opportunities to use the information they already have. And maybe that's the most important distinction in this entire video. I'm not telling you to stop learning. Oh my God, please don't. I'm telling you to stop separating learning from creating. Because when you look at artists across history, you see this relationship again and again. Observation creates questions, questions create experiments, and experiments create failures. We need the failures to create new knowledge, and the knowledge goes back into the work. It's a loop. At this point, you have to start preparing to become the better artist you want to be. Start making the work that artists would make, even if your current version isn't good enough yet, especially if it's not good enough. Because the gap between what you want to create and what you actually create isn't proof that you failed. It's a map. It tells you exactly where to go next. So keep learning, but don't just collect knowledge. Use it, break it, combine it, experiment with it, and turn it into something that only you would have made. Because at the end of the day, that's where learning stops being information and starts becoming art. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. See you in the next one. Take care. Bye bye.